Finally, we're going to make just some isolated things that we talked about that have to do with the how-to that we found come up when people talk about the philosophy that we wanted to address. First one is the issue of running up the score. This would be in competition. When you're ahead and you seem to pour it on more than is needful. The game is already clearly decided. We're talking about scoreboard issues now, and how, in our philosophy, a coach handles the scoreboard and the players in relationship to the opponents and their own team, how that looks like. Because the bottom line is everybody who's been around sport at all has lost sometimes, and lost badly, or lost humiliatingly, or lost painfully a big game that doesn't go their way. And they know what that feels like. And you know what it feels like when the opponent honors you and respects you or disrespects you. And our point is that in this process, to be biblical, we're to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute you, which in sport, though they're not our enemy, the opponent is viewed as somebody in the contest that we are against, though the way we see it is we're for. We talk about striving with, striving for, not striving against. Nonetheless, the world would understand that in a competitive situation, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, somebody's going to be happy in general, somebody's going to be sad in general. And how you handle that process can either draw people to Jesus, remember the target. It can either move people to consider Jesus, it can bless them, or it can function as a curse and drive them away from Jesus, or not even consider that he's part of the ballgame. And this philosophy is always considering and thinking how we can lift up the name of Jesus by what we say and how we play, right? And how you play is going to be a greater indicator than what you say, because everybody will say all the right things after the game, and at a spot where there's no tension, emotion, and there's not been the issue of the contest and the scoreboard affecting it. So, in our opinion, teams that are losing or have poor records or are poor are what we put under the category of the poor and powerless, meaning at that point they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable mentally to discouragement. They're vulnerable emotionally to be sad or humiliated or angry. They're vulnerable. And so we view them as the poor and powerless, and God's heart was for the poor and powerless, that they be built up, that they be edified, that they be encouraged, that they would not lose hope. The goal was not to stomp them and crush them. The goal was to bless them. And in a contest, it's difficult. You better have a plan, and it better be a good plan, and you better educate a plan to make sure you bless somebody who you've just defeated in a contest, in particular when emotions are involved and discouragement might be involved, et cetera, et cetera. And so the issue of how to treat the opponent when things have gone well for you is a big deal. Our experience is that Jesus confessors have no clue or plan whatsoever of how their response in a contest when they win affects other people. Even though they themselves know what it feels like when they've lost, and they feel the pain as a coach or as a player of the humiliation or just the sadness or the grief, whatever word you want, anger, whatever word, there's lots of negative words that can be used about those that are on the downside of the scoreboard. And we feel within this philosophy that our job is to try to encourage people even as we've defeated them in a contest. To at minimum, to treat them with respect and not disrespect them. And so just as in the contest, we don't draw attention to ourselves in any way that shames or humiliates. That doesn't mean don't encourage each other. That doesn't mean don't be excited. It just doesn't mean, it means to us be not overexcited. To not draw attention to yourself personally instead of to your team. To not do something that shames the other team. To taunt him, to mock him, to embarrass him. All these things are, in our opinion, biblically untenable. They are not acceptable in our setting when we want to be a blessing that does not involve humiliating, shaming, and inordinately grieving the opponent when something happens bad for them or good for you. It does not mean that you're not excited. At some point, we have to have visuals on this so you can see what we would deem to be appropriate responses when you succeed and appropriate responses when they fail. And appropriate responses when you fail. And appropriate responses when they succeed. These are all things that we coach up because we always want to protect the poor and powerless. We want to protect the opponent. We don't want to humiliate them inordinately. Again, that does not mean that when you have success that you do nothing. You can be passionate, emotional, without being mocking and taunting. I would think most of you know what I'm talking about, because nowadays there's such an emphasis on drawing attention to yourself, which is a problem with success on our team, or when we fail, of showing responses that are, how can we say it, that are problematic, meaning kicking the dirt, throwing your helmet, freaking out in some way that shows discouragement or despair or hopelessness. We want to live to play another day. It's about the next play. It's about the next game. We always have hope. One of Frosty's sayings was, keep hope alive. Always keep it alive. Hope never has to die, because there's a new play. There's a new day. There's a new game. There's a new season. This was a philosophy of life. It was also a philosophy of sport. And so, in our opinion, when an outcome of a game has been decided, it's our job to protect the opponent, which means don't put them in a spot where they end up more humiliated than they already are. It doesn't mean you don't win by a large margin. If they're not really good and you're really good, or you have a really good day, then the point is, don't keep throwing the ball or shooting three-point shots or trying to huck as many points as you can. It doesn't mean disrespect the game by not playing hard and not playing well. It means be considerate to not try to do more than you need to finish the game in a way that they're protected from humiliation. If we had to pick the sport, we could talk about it. In wrestling, it'd be kind of hard because you're wrestling, and if he keeps getting, at some point he's going to get pinned and the match is going to be over. These issues have to do with when there's a clock. When there's a clock that's going to keep going, and at some point the scoreboard is going to get further and further out of hand. In football, that'd be like throwing long passes after you're clearly ahead and the opponent's defeated. In basketball, that would be shooting three-point shots and continuing to try to run down the court and not bleed the clock so the score doesn't get too freakishly out of hand. These are the kinds we're talking about. In soccer, you got to play hard, but at some point, if you're beating somebody humiliating degree, then you might pass the ball more than you would without just continuing trying to score. It's not shaming the game. It's not disrespecting the game. It's being considerate of the opponent. Now, there's sometimes that we've had coaches and other teams say, keep playing, keep playing. You're humiliating us by not trying. And that's why we say it's not about not trying. It's being wise, depending on your sport, about protecting the opponent by making the scoreboard not being so lopsided that they're humiliated. I've been on the side of being humiliated, 69-0. And I've been on the side where we were ahead and it seemed like we were continuing to try to score because we could, when they couldn't stop us and they themselves couldn't play with. Now, again, we can talk about the particulars, but the point was this. We encourage you to consider the opponent's feelings about the scoreboard and losing a game and what you can do to protect it. Protect them. They appreciate it. I promise you, when I played people and they took a knee even though they could have scored, or they didn't try to score even though they were on our 10-yard line, that they ran the ball instead of do trick plays. But we have believing coaches that are continuing to push the scoreboard and the scoreboard and the scoreboard, even though the outcome of the game is settled. And we consider that not sin, but at some level it's not being considerate, because we know what we felt like when somebody was running up the score on us and it wasn't a positive feeling. And the hard part is when you're dealing with children or 15-year-olds, let alone professionals, and somebody is disrespecting the game by just trying to beat you and rub it in, that's hurtful. Another way, now here's the only caveat to that, and this is going to be an experience that people have to make their decision. It's in certain sports, rankings are involved. And winning by a certain amount, if you only win by 7 versus 50, then they vote you less because you didn't appear to dominate. And that's a fair tension. And you're going to decide how you want to approach that thing. My personal opinion on that is I'd rather the opponent know I respected them and lose an opportunity. I really mean that, because the scoreboard isn't my idol. And I'm going to trust that God's going to honor and bless my respecting an opponent. So if I win by 28 instead of 50, that's more than enough. That I don't need to win more because I want to make sure I get votes because it looks like I crushed somebody. I understand that, and frankly, the opponent would understand it if rankings are involved and if I blew them out and kept pouring it on. But at some level, I think he'd respect me at a deeper level if he knew I toned it down and didn't try to keep. In baseball, it'd be stealing when you're way ahead. There's a kind of a known baseball shtick about doing certain things like stealing, right? You're going to try to hit the ball as hard as you can, and you're going to try to pitch as well as you can. But there's certain things you can do, bunting, to sacrifice, to do stuff that enhances more runs when the outcome is kind of pretty decided. In baseball, they have a culture where that'd be disrespectful. That'd be a problem. In football, they don't have that as natural as they do in baseball. You might remember that somebody did that. I had a situation just last week where one of my friends in our philosophy asked me about another friend in our philosophy who threw and scored a bunch of touchdowns late in the game on somebody when they were throwing the ball long. And he was saying, what is he thinking? What is he doing? And he was doing it to another believer, another guy within our network. And it was like, why would you do that to him? And there may be reasons. It may have been a short pass that went 70 yards instead of a 70-yard bomb. But it may not have been. And it's worth having a conversation about, because we need to care about each other, even if they're our opponent, and even if it's somebody that isn't on our circle. That's our opinion on that. So rankings and their impact is a variable, and you got to decide about that. Playing substitutes. Here's the last thing I'd say about that is, when you're way ahead, let other people play. It's our position. The game outcome's been decided. These guys have practiced just as much as other guys. They're just not as talented, not as good, not as productive, maybe young. Give them experiences. I always felt in football, like I want to give everybody a chance to get on the field, if at all possible, so they can have a grass stain on their jersey. Nowadays, you can't have that with field turf. So they can have something that shows they were in the game. There's nothing worse than a guy having a completely clean uniform, and everybody knows they didn't play. And it's embarrassing for that kid. He works just as hard as every other player. He may, in fact, work harder than the guys who play. I want to respect that guy. I want to respect that his parents, it probably cost them to play their money, maybe a lot of money, and to give him a chance to say he was in the game or feel he was in the game or write home or talk to his grandmother and say, I got in a few places. That means the world to those kids. I know that because I was one of those kids. I played on teams where I wasn't a player. I didn't get in the game at all. And I remember what it felt like. And the good news about that, the Lord leverages that to help you think about other people and be considerate of others rather than yourself. Your game, your team, your record, your appear to be a better coach because you won by a lot. That's all selfish. If you're driven by glorifying God, then do things that glorify God. Have a heart to glorify God. In my opinion, it glorifies God when you protect the opponent from humiliation and shame. In my opinion. That's the opinion of our school. And in our opinion, it glorifies God when I fight to allow guys to get playing time. Because if I'm ahead by enough, it's not going to put the game at risk. And if I know that success is going to happen on the scoreboard, and again, I'm not looking for success on the scoreboard, but I do have a responsibility to be competent. In my being competent, we're going to be successful on the scoreboard sometimes. Maybe a lot. We've won national championships within this philosophy, and teams within this philosophy have lost every game. And God was glorified in both places. It's just like Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11 is about faithfulness. Some people were kings in authority. Some people had their heads chopped off and lived in caves and holes in the ground. But God was looking for faithfulness. The outcomes were outside of their control at some level. That's what we're thinking about. Faithful to the mission of glorifying God by His power, for His glory, according to His word. And in a competitive setting, in our opinion, protecting the opponent and respecting him is not disrespecting the game by not running up the score. And playing people who deserve to get on the field when the outcome's decided, and you don't need to keep playing your starters into the fourth quarter when you're up by 45. You can start sprinkling in substitutes. I can appreciate that you may want to play the whole half of your starting group. And you may want to start the first part of the second half with your starting group. But if it keeps getting out of hand, start substituting key guys. Give younger kids a chance. It's in the best interest of your program for kids to be happy. And it's funner to play than to not play. So you won't win as big a score. You won't score as many points, and you won't win as decisively. But where's your heart in this thing? Is your heart to glorify God and bless people? Or is your heart for your reputation so you can look like you're a better coach? That's what we're thinking about in this philosophy.